A pontoon bridge, also known as a floating bridge, uses floats or shallow draft boats to support a continuous deck for pedestrian and vehicle travel. The buoyancy of the supports limits the maximum load they can carry. Most pontoon bridges are temporary, used in wartime and civil emergencies. Permanent floating bridges are useful for sheltered water crossings where it is not considered economically feasible to suspend a bridge from anchored piers. Such bridges can require a section that is elevated, or can be raised or removed, to allow waterborne traffic to pass. Pontoon bridges have been in use since ancient times and have been used to great advantage in many battles throughout history. Among them the Battle of Garigliano, the Battle of Oudenarde, the crossing of the Rhine during World War II, and during the Iran-Iraq War Operation Ornate. Definition: a pontoon bridge is a collection of specialized, shallow draft boats or floats, connected together to cross a river or canal, with a track or deck attached on top. The water buoyancy supports the boats, limiting the maximum load to the total and point buoyancy of the pontoons or boats. The supporting boats or floats can be open or closed, temporary or permanent in installation, and made of rubber, metal, wood, or concrete. The decking may be temporary or permanent, and constructed out of wood, modular metal, or asphalt or concrete over a metal frame. Etymology: the spelling pontoon in English dates from at least 1870. The use continued in references found in U.S. patents during the 1890s. It continued to be spelled in that fashion through World War II, when temporary floating bridges were used extensively throughout the European theater. U.S. combat engineers commonly pronounced the word pontoon rather than pontoon, and U.S. military manuals spelled it using a single O. The original word was derived from Old French ponton, from Latin ponto, from pons. Design: when designing a pontoon bridge, the civil engineer must take into consideration the Archimedes principle, looking at the maximum amount of load that it is intended to support. Each pontoon can support a load equal to the mass of the water that it displaces, but this load also includes the mass of the bridge itself. If the maximum load of a bridge section is exceeded, one or more pontoons become submerged and will proceed to sink. The roadway across the pontoons must also be able to support the load, yet be light enough not to limit their carrying capacity. Survey to determine the best location. The connection to shore often causes problems, requiring the design of approaches that are not too steep, keep the bank from crumbling, and when tidal, can be used at all states of the tide. Floating bridges were typically constructed using wood. Such a wooden floating bridge could be built in a series of sections, starting from an anchored point on a shore. Pontoons were formed using boats, several barrels lashed together, rafts of timbers, or some combination of these. Each bridge section consisted of one or more pontoons, which were maneuvered into position and then anchored, using underwater, land-based or overhead anchors. These pontoons were then linked together using wooden stringers called balks. The balks were then covered by a series of cross-planks called chesses to form a road surface, and the chesses were held in place with side guardrails. More modern pontoons use prefabricated floating structures. The expected life of a pontoon bridge is normally short, from a few hours to weeks or months, and the design has to take account of the expected life. Some bridges have been designed and survived much longer. In Hobart, a long pontoon bridge built in 1943 was only replaced after 21 years. The Fourth Galata Bridge that spans the Golden Horn in Istanbul, Turkey, was built in 1912 and operated for 80 years. Precautions are needed to protect a pontoon bridge from becoming damaged. The bridge can be dislodged or inundated whenever the load limit of the bridge is exceeded. A pontoon bridge can also become overloaded when one section of the bridge is weighted down much more heavily than the other parts. The bridge can be induced to sway or oscillate in a hazardous manner because of the regular stride of a group of soldiers, or from other types of repeated loads. Flotsam and heavy floating objects can also accumulate on the pontoons, increasing the drag from river current and potentially damaging the bridge. Fire, storms, floods and ice are harder to protect against. See below for floating pontoon failures and disasters. Historic uses. Ancient China. In ancient China, the Zhou dynasty Chinese text of the Shi Jing records that King Wen of Zhou was the first to create a pontoon bridge in the 11th century BC. However, the historian Joseph Needham has pointed out that in all likely scenarios, the temporary pontoon bridge was invented during the 9th or 8th century BC in China, as this part was perhaps a later addition to the book. Although earlier temporary pontoon bridges had been made in China, the first secure and permanent ones in China came first during the Qin dynasty. The later Song dynasty Chinese statesman Cao Cheng once wrote of early pontoon bridges in China. The Chanqia Huishuan says that in the 58th year of the Zhou King Nan, there was invented in the Qin state the floating bridge with which to cross rivers. But the Taming Ode in the Shi Jing says that he joined boats and made of them a bridge over the river Wei. Sun Yan comments that this shows that the boats were arranged in a row, like the beams with boards laid across them, which is just the same as the pontoon bridge of today. Tu Yu also thought this. Cheng Kang Cheng says that the Zhou people invented it and used it whenever they had occasion to do so, but the Qin people, to whom they handed it down, were the first to fasten it securely together. During the Eastern Han Dynasty, the Chinese created a very large pontoon bridge that spanned the width of the Yellow River. There was also the rebellion of Gongsun Shu in 33 AD, where a large pontoon bridge with fortified posts was constructed across the Yangtze River, eventually broken through with ramming ships by official Han troops under Commander Sen Peng. During the late Eastern Han into the Three Kingdoms period, during the Battle of Chibi in 208 AD, the Prime Minister Cao Cao once linked the majority of his fleet together with iron chains, which proved to be a fatal mistake once he was thwarted with a fire attack by Sun Quan's fleet. The armies of Emperor Taizu of Song had a large pontoon bridge built across the Yangtze River in 974 in order to secure supply lines during the Song dynasty's conquest of the southern Tang. On October 22, 1420, Ghiyasuddin Nakar, the official diarist of the embassy sent by the Timurid ruler of Persia, Mirza Shahrukh, to the Ming dynasty of China during the reign of the Yongle Emperor, recorded his sight and travel over a large floating pontoon bridge at Lanzhou as he crossed the Yellow River on this day. He wrote that it was composed of 23 boats, of great excellence and strength attached together by a long chain of iron as thick as a man's thigh, and this was moored on each side to an iron post as thick as a man's waist extending a distance of 10 cubits on the land and planted firmly in the ground, the boats being fastened to this chain by means of big hooks. There were placed big wooden planks over the boats so firmly and evenly that all the animals were made to pass over it without difficulty. Greco-Roman era. The Greek writer Herodotus in his histories records several pontoon bridges. For Emperor Darius I the Great of Persia, the Greek Mandricles of Samos once engineered a pontoon bridge that stretched across the Bosphorus, linking Asia to Europe, so that Darius could pursue the fleeing Scythians as well as move his army into position in the Balkans to overwhelm Macedon. Other spectacular pontoon bridges were Xerxes' pontoon bridges across the Hellespont by Xerxes I in 480 BC to transport his huge army into Europe. And meanwhile other chief constructors proceeded to make the bridges, and thus they made them. They put together 50 oared galleys and triremes, 360 to be under the bridge towards the Euxine Sea, and 314 to be under the other, the vessels lying in the direction of the stream of the Hellespont, to support the tension of the ropes. They placed him together thus, and let down very large anchors, those on the one side towards the Pontus because of the winds which blow from within outwards, and on the other side, towards the west and the Aegean, because of the southeast and south winds. They left also an opening for a passage through, so that any who wish might be able to sail into the Pontus with small vessels, and also from the Pontus outwards. Having thus done, they proceeded to stretch tight the ropes, straining them with wooden windlasses, not now appointing the two kinds of rope to be used apart from one another, but assigning to each bridge 2 ropes of white flax and 4 of the papyrus ropes. When the passage was bridged over, they sawed up logs of wood, and making them equal in length to the breadth of the bridge, they laid them above the stretched ropes, and having set them thus in order, they again fastened them above. When this was done, they carried on brushwood, and having set the brushwood also in place, they carried onto it earth, and when they had stamped down the earth firmly, they built a barrier along on each side, so that the baggage animals and horses might not be frightened by looking out over the sea. The late Roman writer Vegetius, in his work De Re Militari, wrote, "But the most commodious invention is that of the small boats hollowed out of one piece of timber and very light both by their make and the quality of the wood. The army always has a number of these boats upon carriages, together with a sufficient quantity of planks and iron nails." The Emperor Caligula is said to have ridden a horse across a pontoon bridge stretching 2 miles between Baiae and Puteoli while wearing the armor of Alexander the Great, to mock a soothsayer who had claimed he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. Caligula's construction of the bridge cost a massive sum of money and added to discontent with his rule. Middle Ages. Although pontoons declined in use during the European Middle Ages, they were still used alongside regular boats to span rivers during campaigns, or to link communities which lacked resources to build permanent bridges. According to the chronicles, the earliest floating bridge across the Dnieper River in the area was built in the 1115. It was located near Vyshhor at Kiev. Towards the end of the medieval period, pontoon bridges became once again a standard part of military engineering. The early modern period in pontoon use was dominated by the wars of the 18th and 19th centuries, during which the art and science of pontoon bridging barely changed. This, however, did not stop all innovation. In 1708 a Swedish army used a leather pontoon bridge to cross a river before the Battle of Holochin. During the Peninsular War, the British Army transported tin pontoons that were lightweight and could be quickly turned into a floating bridge. Lt. Colonel Charles Pasley of the Royal School of Military Engineering at Chatham, England, developed a new form of pontoon which was adopted in 1817 by the British Army. Each pontoon was split into 2 halves, and you could connect 2 pointed ends together in cases where you had tidal flow. Each half was enclosed, so reducing the risk of swamping, and there were multiple lashing points. The Palsy pontoon lasted until 1836, when it was replaced by the Blanchard pontoon, which comprised tin cylinders 3 feet wide and 22 feet long, placed 11 foot apart, making the pontoon very buoyant. The pontoon was tested with the Palsy pontoon on the Medway. An alternative proposed by Charles Pasley comprised 2 copper canoes, each 2 foot 8 inches wide and 22 foot long, and coming in 2 sections, fastened side by side to make a double canoe raft, using copper in preference to tin, which corroded quickly. Lashed at 10-foot centers, they are good for cavalry, infantry and light guns. At 5-foot centers, heavy cannon can cross. The canoes could also be lashed together to form rafts. One cart pulled by 2 horse carried 2 half canoes and stores. A comparison of pontoons used by each nation's army shows that almost all were open boats coming in 1, 2 or even 3 pieces, mainly wood, some with canvas and rubber protection. Belgium used an iron boat. America used cylinders split into 3. In 1862 the Union forces commanded by Major General Ambrose Burnside were stuck on the wrong side of the Rappahannock River at Fredericksburg for lack of the arrival of the pontoon train, resulting in severe losses. The report of this disaster resulted in Britain forming and training a pontoon troop of engineers. During the American Civil War, various forms of pontoon bridges were tried and discarded. Wooden pontoons and India rubber bag pontoons shaped like a torpedo proved practical until the development of cotton canvas-covered pontoons, which required more maintenance but were lightweight and easier to work with and transport. From 1864, a lightweight design known as Cumberland pontoons, a folding boat system, were widely used during the Atlanta campaign to transport soldiers and artillery across rivers in the South. In 1872, at a military review before Queen Victoria, a pontoon bridge was thrown across the River Thames at Windsor, Berkshire. The river was 250 feet wide and the bridge, comprising 15 pontoons, held by 14 anchors, was completed in 22 minutes and then used to move 5 battalions of troops across the river. The next day it was removed in 34 minutes. The British Blanchard pontoon stayed in British use until the late 1870s, when it was replaced by the Blood pontoon, which returned to the open boat system, which enabled them to be used as boats when not needed as pontoons. Side-carrying handles helped transportation. The new pontoon proved strong enough to support loaded elephants and siege guns as well as military traction engines. Early 20th century, the British Blood pontoon MKII, which took the original and cut it into 2 halves, was still in use with the British Army in 1924. The First World War saw developments on trestles to form the link between a river bank and the pontoon bridge. Some infantry bridges in WW1 used any material available, including petrol cans, as flotation devices. The Kapok assault bridge for infantry was developed for the British Army, using kapok-filled canvas float and timber footwalks. America created their own version. Folding boat equipment was developed in 1928 and went through several versions until it was used in WW2 to complement the Bailey pontoon. It had a continuous canvas hinge and could fold flat for storage and transportation. When assembled, it could carry 15 men, and with 2 boats and some additional toppings it could transport a 3-ton truck. Further upgrades during WW2 resulted in it moving to a Class 9 bridge.